From the heart of Maine, this is the DuView podcast.
All right, and welcome to this week's episode of the DuView podcast. I'm your host, Du, a.k.a. Ryan Dumont, and we've hit it, folks. We now have 40 episodes under our belts here, or under my belt, rather, size 38 to be exact. No, but seriously, it's exciting to hit 40 episodes, things have been going pretty well. Had a great episode last 2 weeks ago, I guess, or a few weeks ago with my buddy Jake Bass from college. Talking about, country music, working in education, and a lot of other just great stuff. Really had a good time catching up with Jake, talking with him, and I'm going to have a really good time the rest of this year, really, because I have a nice slate of guests and people to come on and really join me and entertain you guys and tell some tales and learn some information and, hear some really cool stuff from some really cool people. But before we get to that, I wanted to do another solo episode. And today's is kind of interesting. For some, I'm sure. It's definitely an interesting one for me. I guess to kind of preface this episode, as folks know that have listened to the podcast, at one point in my life, I did run a presidential campaign. And it's been exactly 3 years since the primary that I took part in as a campaign worker, specifically state director for the Weld 2020 presidential campaign. I ran the New Hampshire operations of the campaign. And that being said, though, I really wanted to do an episode to really kind of tell a good chunk of the story, if not the majority of the story, without, having to sit down and write a book about my whole experience, because that'd be a different type of style. But I really wanted to kind of put the campaign to bed in certain aspects. I talk about it a lot here, and I really kind of want to put some of the past stuff to bed to move on to some newer and more interesting things, not just politically, but otherwise, and open up more space and talk more about different things that I'm, interested in doing versus just more of, I did this on the campaign, just to change things up a little bit. I'm sure, folks, you've heard enough of it, but, it was getting to the point, that if you could almost turn, every time that, Du says or mention something about the presidential campaign, take a shot. You could almost basically turn it into a drinking game. And I'm joking there in part, but seriously, it's something that I cherish and I value and I look back upon highly. But it's also, something at that point that, it happened and it's over with, and it's time to kind of, like I said, put it to bed in certain aspects and, just take what I learned from there and kind of move on. But again, I kind of want to tell more of the story because it's a really unique experience in a lot of way. Like, it's not just like, oh, you ran a small, a campaign or, whatever. No, this was quite different because in a lot of ways, because when you have somebody like Donald Trump, who was running the Republican Party at the time, now keep in mind, this all takes back, this is all taking place, 3 years ago now. So this is all happening, the ground is being set for this basically from after the events of the 2016 election, the first few years of the Trump presidency, and eventually, our story really kind of picks up in 2019 when I get hired by the campaign, at least on my end. But the campaign had existed for, I think, 2 or 3 months before I came on board because they really hadn't hired, like a state staff in New Hampshire yet and all that type of stuff. And so I was one of the first, if not the first, to be hired for the New Hampshire staff, which was, really interesting in a lot of ways. And I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to keep talking about how this campaign was different in a lot of ways because like I was saying, when you have somebody like Donald Trump who has such command in a lot of ways, or at least so people thought, or at least how it was perceived over the Republican Party, you don't think that anybody's going to run a primary challenge against him. And to explain to you people what folks that don't know, a primary is how we select our leaders. And so the political parties get together and they have a vote. Like you start at the beginning when you have people running for president, you have like anywhere, you can have as many candidates as you want. Say there's 12 candidates. Well, eventually you have to get down to one. And so through the primary process, whoever, proves themselves to be the best of the Republican candidates, quote unquote, is the person who will go on in the general election, which happens and then in like November of insert every 4 years here. And so the primary, and specifically the New Hampshire primary, happens in February of the year prior to the election. And so these primaries are basically how they whittle down the slate of candidates to one, which then they speak at the big convention. And at the convention is basically when they ratify or they choose, when it becomes officially apparent that who is the individual that is going to represent the party in this election. And they have it at all different levels. Even if you're, running for state senate and there's a number of candidates, they'll have a primary or a caucus depending on the state. But, again, I'm partial to the primary process because that's what I'm familiar with. And, that's and it's just, like I said, it's just a simple way of them picking leaders. But at the same time, Governor Weld standing up and running proved in the Republican Party that the majority of not everybody in the Republican Party was okay with what Donald Trump was doing as the executive, as the, president of the United States, because as we'll talk about a little bit later in the episode, there were a lot of things that, Republicans just didn't do, and that I guess whatever new breed of GOP is out there now is cool with doing. But again, it goes against like all the things that the founders of the, kind of the founders of the party and even like, the founders of this country were going for. And so that's why somebody stood up. It was standing up regardless of what the outcome would be, because someone had to say what Donald Trump is doing isn't right. And people can say, well, he made us money and he made us energy dependent again and blah, blah, blah. But you can't, to get all these things and to only, to make sure your side wins, that was the problem. He wasn't doing things for everybody. He was doing things for his friends. He wasn't doing things for the majority of the American people at the end of the day. Again, my opinion. But again, I'll lead some examples later on in the episode that, again, comparing the two candidates. Again, I am biased. That's fine. But again, I worked a lot of time in the Republican Party, and I worked for many different types of Republican candidates. Anybody from Paul LePage to liaisoning with, the Poliquin campaign, et cetera, and so forth. So I've worked with a lot of different types of Republicans, just to name a few there. And again, I look back the most fondly, however, on the time that I worked for Governor Weld, being Bill Weld, former Republican governor of Massachusetts. He was governor in Massachusetts in the 90s, saved the state from bankruptcy, was one of the first Republicans to be accepting of gay marriage. He was one of the first allies of the LBG, or not, they didn't call it that at the time, but of what we call the LGBTQ community today. He was the first, person to respect, give everybody equal respect. And that's the really kind of the cool thing that was about Governor Weld, is that, and I've talked about this before, but, he was wanted to give everybody the same opportunity. If you, regardless of what you look like and where you come from in this country, you should have the same opportunities as everybody. Now, if you choose to make poor decisions with your opportunities, that's on you, unfortunately. But you should be given the same opportunity as everybody else. And I think that is a unique stance in a lot of ways, especially as a, and you can only do that as a moderate Republican because, as I'll explain in a little bit later, being a moderate Republican is kind of the best of both worlds in a lot of ways. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of folks actually kind of lean towards being a very, very moderate conservative, and I'll explain that in a little bit as well. But, to get with the start, kind of get to the start of the campaign, really, the background for things is that, I started college in 2015, and so I was coming upon graduation in 2019, and so I had, started applying for jobs, and so I had gone down to the Political Institute, which St. Anselm College had, and in which many of my classes were in, and where my professors' offices and all that stuff. Great, really in unique location. It's also doubles as a museum, and they have candidates speak there. Basically, if you run for president, at some point you'll probably enter the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, located at St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. But that being said, they, sent out an email to me, and they said, hey, we got this individual looking for campaign staff for the presidential primary, and I, was like, oh, which presidential, for the Republican presidential primary, and I said, oh, there's going to be a primary, there's going to be a primary challenge, and they said, yeah, Governor Weld is going to be running against President Trump. And so I said, you know what? This is tremendous because over the last few, again, working in Republican politics, there's certain things you're kind of okay with at certain points in terms of what laws get passed, and okay, maybe a little bit too much money was getting spent, but at least at the end of the day certain agenda items were still getting filled. But basically at that point I was realizing that compromising way too much of my own values in terms of the environment, because they started gutting the EPA and doing a lot of what you could describe as undemocratic activity in the sense of jeopardizing democracy. Again, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other scholarly and educated folks. But anyway, regardless of that fact, that's what kind of pushed me towards going over and working with the Weld campaign, because it gave me kind of an opportunity to stand up for what was going on in the Republican Party, because I wasn't cool with all of it, because I had seen some kind of Kool-Aid drinking kind of stuff go on when I had worked for the party. Blind loyalty is dangerous regardless of who it's for. You got to have a healthy amount of skepticism regardless of who the individual person is. That could be even for, one of the founding fathers you still have to be skeptical of. It doesn't matter who they are. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's a saint. So, it's I was seeing a lot of blind loyalty. And again, I can only speak, well, what about the Democrats? Again, I can only speak to what was going on in the Republican Party at the time and in this, in the Northeast, in this area. And again, it spoke numbers to what was going on nationally too, because regardless of what people say, New Hampshire is kind of an echo chamber, not an echo chamber, but it's kind of an interesting place politically, in terms of being kind of a good kind of battle map in certain aspects for how the country can kind of be split out, because New Hampshire in a lot of ways is very purple, and so it can kind of be a predictor of how some of your more moderate states are going to fly. And that's why I like looking and having the New Hampshire primary when it is. It's not determination of everything. Folks have gone on to win the New Hampshire primary and not become the nominee for president. That has happened to John McCain when he ran in 2000, 2000 election rather. John McCain ran against Bush, won the New Hampshire primary by the skin of his teeth and via the help of one of the folks who came on to help us in Weld 2020. But regardless of that, we'll get to that later. But that being said, he was able to pull off a really tight victory there, which gave him a lot of momentum in a lot of ways for that election cycle. But at the end of the day, George Bush ended up becoming the nominee. You can look into that for different reasons as well. But anyway, back to Weld 2020. So they were looking for campaign staff, and this is about April of 2019 at this point in the timeline, and so. We were set to graduate in early May, I believe May 15th, I believe was graduation. I could be wrong on that date. It could have been the week before. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, I was hired by the campaign manager at the time, Jennifer Horn, and they were really kind of looking for somebody who was kind of like me, a New England Republican, which is a moderate Republican that is fiscally conservative and socially liberal. And this is where I mentioned earlier in the episode that I was going to talk about why people kind of liked what we were talking about, what we were doing, and the policies that made what we were doing kind of popular and could kind of set us apart from what the I guess the tone deafness of the Trump agenda was. Because it's funny when you ask folks, well, what did he do? Oh, he did a lot, but they can't really give you specifics, because in all reality, all he did was really kind of change the tax policy for millionaires and wealthy people, and again, did a lot of damage to how we operate as a country, and again, freedom, openness, and all those types of things. And again, it seems ironic that we ended his presidency at the tail end of COVID, where things were not as open and free. But again, it's in a unique time in history, and you can't. Yeah, again, I don't think it's comparable really in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, what Bill Weld was looking to do was keep the government out of your bedroom and out of your pocketbook. And what I mean by that is privacy for citizens. If you want to be gay and shoot guns and smoke pot, just do it safely and not near schools, and all the basically common sense, pretty logical things. But again, not limiting people based on what they want to do, and within reason, as long as you don't impede upon other people or impede upon the majority of safety and things like that. And you go, well, what do you call safety? But again, what we normalized as things before COVID and before before the Trump election. Like, we had some state of normalcy. We've just kind of forgotten what it's like. And again, people can say, oh, blah, 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 and push back against that. But I'm just going to bat that aside and not really address it because it derails the story in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, wanting to, really clamp down on the amount of spending that was going on at the federal level and the spending that's still going on at the federal level. They spend like, drunken pirates. And again, one of the things that really upset me and why I really liked what Governor Weld was doing with his campaign was the Republican Party has gotten away from being fiscally conservative. And that used to be a big part, of the party, was this wing of fiscal conservatives who really wanted to watch the budget. Again, if the U.S. government and the state governments and the town governments are going to expect people to pay taxes and, balance their checkbooks and do all the things to be financially stable and financially, I guess, smart, you need to educate people on how to be financially smart, which doesn't always happen in this country. And B, you need to also make sure your government is doing the same thing, because how can you expect your citizens to do that if the government can't? You need to be an example. And that's, again, why I liked Governor Weld's style of governing, I guess, really, at the end of the day. It was, if we are telling people how to be, we need to be the best example we can be. And if we get back to that approach in politics, I think a lot would change for the better. But anyway, regardless of that fact, again, there was the fiscal conservative side of it, making sure we conserve the environment and address global warming, which, again, is very, I guess, out of the ordinary, I guess, for the modern Republican Party. Again, we don't care about the environment anymore, I guess. We don't care about clean air and clean water. We don't care about, making sure that we have good outdoor recreation for outdoorsmen, whether those be hikers or hunters or snowmobilers or cross-country skiers. Anybody, again, we have such a beautiful country. We need to preserve it. Again, it's getting back to like the Teddy Roosevelt idea of being a Republican. Again, not letting the spending go crazy, conserving what we have, and not being, too much of again, staying out of people's lives, letting them do what they want to do as long as they're not impeding on other people. Same thing with guns, addressing the mental health issue around firearms, and also looking at alternative ways of energy to help people, and also the affordable housing, because all the affordable housing, and also, labor and, healthcare, and because all these things really at the end of the day are interconnected. If you have, a safe, warm place to live, or a safe, cool place to live, if you live down south, I guess, you're going to be able to live a more productive life. You're going to pay taxes. You're going to be a better citizen. You're going to have time to vote if you have money in the bank, et cetera, and so forth. So it really kind of leads, in a perfect world, it leads to a much better, healthier democracy and everything like that. And so, again, it was just kind of, I guess, in a lot of ways, hitting the reset button and getting back to the things that really mattered that would allow our country to also move forward. And again, another thing on that front, and again, I'm just kind of getting all the policy ideas out of the way so I don't have to explain, what I say, when Governor Weld gave a speech, these are the kind of things I'm talking about. And so one of the last policies I really want to touch on was addressing the future and looking to the advancements in AI and drones and all these other technologies that are going to greatly impact the labor force. And what we mean by that is that, eventually there aren't going to be people can say, oh, that's not true, that's not going to happen, whatever. There's not going to be long haul truckers eventually. They're not going to be they're not going to be, shipyards and trucking and all these other industries as we see them, because robotics and AI can come a long way. Staffs for these places and the amount of, people they're going to have on board and everything like that are going to change drastically when you can have, a workforce that doesn't really tire, and you only need to have a few people around to keep things running. These things are coming. Our campaign met with the experts in Silicon Valley for many different companies, which there's numerous ones, so I'm not going to list, everybody we met with, and obviously probably can't for, privacy reasons as well. So that being said, we met with some of the, again, experts, and that was the cool thing about this campaign. Unlike the Trump campaign, we didn't just shoot from the hip. If we talked about something, we researched it. And that's what all campaigns should strive to do. You should strive to inform your constituents in the best way possible. You shouldn't be trying to, mislead them or use mistruths or bend the truth to get your way. And that's, again, one of the reasons I went to work for Bill Weld, because he was honest. He was upfront with people. If things were, in a rough sort of way. He lets you know, hey, things are in a rough sort of way, but we have some plans in place to get people out. And he had done that, and he had shown he could do that, and had done that in Massachusetts. And the unique thing about Massachusetts, it's a, excuse me, Massachusetts, it's a big bureaucracy. It has a large government, so in a lot of ways, it is a lot like the government down in Washington, D.C. So it really kind of, if you know, there are a few states that you can live in that really kind of, if you were, a governor, prepare you in as many ways as possible to become, the president in certain ways. And so when I came on in 2019, I was kind of what they were looking for. A lot of the things that I just described to you as policy points, I really believed in personally as well, which is unique in a lot of ways in this field, because a lot of the times, as some of my other guests that have worked in politics have said on this podcast, you can't always allow your true ideals to come out. But again, with this one, I could, because I believed in everything that I was talking about and what the candidate was talking about, which is unique in a lot of ways. Again, that just kind of happened. That wasn't planned. I didn't search that out. Again, I was sent an email and accepted the job after, doing an interview. And so we graduated in May. Like I said, middle of May. And so kind of picture, I graduated May 15th with a terrible sunburn after being outside at graduation. Had a straight, tan line, burn line across my head where the graduation cap fit, and then went to work on the 17th, right, 2 days after. Stayed with some great family friends in Manchester, New Hampshire. Shout out to Rich and Jean Slingsby. Wouldn't have been able to make it through New Hampshire without you guys. Again, long-term friends that come up to Maine and and hike and do all the, and again, you not use Maine, but use Maine for all the wonders and the beauty, and appreciate Maine for the how excellent of a place it is. And so, but they live in Manchester, New Hampshire, also in the same city where I went to college, and so I was able to stay with them until I got settled and found my own place. And so again, great thank you to them. There are a lot of people that helped me along the way on this journey, and I really wouldn't be able to have made it through that time without them, because it was a very interesting experience in a lot of ways. But that being said, so in the first 2 weeks, it was pretty light in a lot of ways. What we're doing for work. Going to take a preface too. If I pause at any time, I'm also going to be taking quick drink breaks, because again, it's a solo episode. I'm talking a lot here, so quick drink break here, guys. Sorry about that. And so that being said, the first couple weeks were pretty light, because really at the end of the day, we were getting to know each other. And actually, I went to college with one of the guys who also got hired, to a gentleman by the name of Tim Stapp. Shout out to Tim. Wouldn't have made it through the campaign at the end of the day without your buddy and your family. Appreciate them too. They let us stay at your camp and even hosted several campaign events themselves. So great people, the Stapps. Really do appreciate everything they did for the campaign, especially once I ended up taking the reins, so to speak. But it did not start that way. I do have to preface that. I was hired as a field representative. My area originally was going to be the seacoast of New Hampshire, because that's where I ended up getting an apartment with DuView podcast friend and former guest, James Talalis. I lived with him because Jim also had a job on the seacoast as well, and we lived in Newmarket, which is a fantastic town. Again, another shout out, I guess, to the town of Newmarket, New Hampshire. Really do look fondly on living there. Wish I got to explore the town a little bit more, but unfortunately, like I said, when you work in the campaign, you don't have a lot of free time. And so we ended up getting an office space. It was not the best office space by any means, and I'll go into detail with that. There's some crazy stuff that ended up happening there, and it ended up in the news, so it's public record. So it wouldn't be like I'm sharing any deep dark secrets or anything too crazy like that. But that being said, we're getting close to the end of May at this point, and things went quiet for a couple days, and it was kind of weird. And so we weren't all working together in the office yet, because we had just rented the space. And the office, again, the problem with the office was it wasn't really accessible. I mean, you could get into it, obviously, like it had a door, like duh, but like it wasn't like on the main strip of downtown. It was up behind, and you really couldn't put any campaign signs in the window, and it wasn't very like visibly accessible, and like it wasn't really you weren't going to be able to like bring people in or put a sign out on the sidewalk or have people out there with signs or really have like a presence on the main street where the majority of the traffic was, which was unfortunate. But hey, when you're I guess financially limited in certain aspects or don't want to spend a bunch of money on the office, it kind of makes sense, especially when you have to run things. And I'll explain how we had to run things in a little bit just because of, you know, limitations on a lot of different things when you're running kind of a rebel campaign in a lot of ways. But, this is the first few weeks of June 2019 at this point, and we hadn't heard from Jennifer in a couple days. And so we weren't working together, as I was starting to say, yet, because we had just, like I said, rented the office, had no furniture, nothing like that in there yet. And so we were waiting for, the call to say the office, we were good. She gotten keys and everything like that. We were good to go. And she come to find out, she had ended up having disagreements with the folks in the campaign, and I can't obviously can't go into too many details. Had disagreements with folks in the campaign and disagreements with Governor Weld, and she had left the campaign and really without notifying us on in a lot of ways. She waited till the last minute and was not did not communicate that very well, unfortunately, and really kind of left us high and dry in a lot of ways after hiring us, which again, I'm not just bitching and moaning, but again, it was frustrating coming out of college and, kind of being left high and dry, the first few weeks of your job. But unfortunately, one of the folks from the campaign reached out, one of the secretaries, and we were able to maneuver that and ended up getting on the next day, basically getting on in early June, getting on a Zoom call, meeting the rest of the national campaign staff who we'd only heard about in Jennifer, talking with Jennifer. And ironically, when Jennifer left, she would go on to become one of the founding members, or according to her, founding members of the Lincoln Project, the anti-Trump majority moderate and anti-Trump Republican group that aired a lot of ads and raised a lot of money against the Trump campaign and really did some I guess you could call them like mercenary, renegade, Republican type stuff in the 2020 election, if you want to call it that. So that's ironic that that would happen. So didn't want to fight the good fight the right way. Wanted to go, try to take somebody out by the kneecaps, and that's really what a group like that does. And I'm not saying they didn't serve a place and they didn't do the right thing at the time, but really in the grand scheme of things, they are more of a hurt to our campaign process and democratic elections than they are a help at the end of the day. And I'm happy to admit, and again, that's hindsight. At the time, I would have said something very different, but looking back on it, again, 3 years later, again, feel very different about that. But anyway, in early June, we met with the rest of the national campaign via Zoom, including the governor. We talked about the general plan, what we were looking to do, and it really became apparent that New Hampshire was going to be the majority of the focus, to the point that, again, nothing too crazy. Again, you can just look this up online, but to the point that we really didn't have any Iowa staff until and you can't even really call them staff, but, we didn't really have anybody doing a lot of work in Iowa for us, which is the first caucus in the process for the whole election cycle. But anyway, regardless of that, we didn't really even have somebody what would have been the first, televised event in the process. And so, that would change later on when we had some change in staff later on. But as I said, at the time, it became apparent that, as I said, New Hampshire was going to be the main focus, and a lot of the time, effort, and money, and again, the only staff we would have outside of the national staff that worked out of Boston would be in New Hampshire. And so a huge part of, what would become, I guess, the leadership in New Hampshire early on would come from our steering committee. And a steering committee is an essential part to any campaign, really. If you ever talk with me about campaigns, you'll always hear me mention some type of steering committee, or you could also call them an advisory board. But I like the term steering committee better personally because, they're supposed to steer you in the right direction. Oh, captain by captain type stuff, which is always a good time at the end of the day, in my opinion. But that being said, our steering committee and the first real, I'll say, clutch core three members were as follows. You had Peter Spalding, Clara Monier, and Betty Tamposi, who were all in their own right very respected members in Republican politics at one point or another. They had all done something pretty immaculate. Peter had a hand in the successful campaign of John McCain in that I mentioned earlier in 2000 in New Hampshire. And that's where he and I kind of bonded a lot over our mutual kind of respect and friendship of John McCain. As I also had the opportunity of spending time with him when I was in college, which was really unique. Again, legendary figure in Republican politics as far as I'm concerned, presidential candidate, and really kind of was one of the last people that really stood up to Trump and really, did the right thing on behalf of the American people for the right reasons, and really kind of secured his legacy in that aspect. And so we bond over that. Clara Monier had worked, had run the housing administration in the Northeast. Out of Boston area for Ronald Reagan. And Betty Tamposi had worked in the State Department and had done many other things and had run for office in her own right. And again, all these people had either been, in office, had helped their, spouse run to be governor. They all had this amazing amount of experience. You could say, what political leaning is the town of Derry, or what political leaning is Concord or Portsmouth, and they could tell you off the top of their head without really, thinking too hard. And it was really unique to have that wealth of knowledge and experience. And again, their leadership was really what kind of kept things going after we had, the first leaving in the campaign. And they had been then on the search for, I guess, what you would call a new state director, because again, the steering committee does not usually lead things. And again, that was just kind of a temporary fix until they could find a new state director. And unfortunately, when you're running a renegade Republican campaign, you don't get the access to the same hiring pools as you do, because a lot of folks are worried about their long-term employment and everything like that, and if they're going to piss somebody off, or things like that, or if they're going to upset the natural order of things. But again, sometimes if your opportunities are, I'm not saying limited, but when you're given certain opportunities, you also have to take them too. And so again, having the opportunity to work on a presidential campaign, I'm saying regardless of who it is for, but again, it's not like I worked for Vermin Supreme. I worked for a real qualified, like, actual political candidate, that had held a respectable office, et cetera, and so forth. But that being said, the next two state directors we had were just, and I'm not trying to speak ill, were just incapable of doing the job because they had very little actual campaign experience, not just political campaign, presidential campaign experience, but they had done very little with creating a plan and enacting it. And so that being said, being in a position where you're already, limited with what your candidates are, you kind of have to take you can get. And so if it says they held the position of state anything, you probably gave them the opportunity. Or a lot of people were pulled also from the Johnson campaign. Bill Weld had worked with Gary Johnson before returning to the Republican Party, and had done a lot of work with the Libertarians. In 2016, was actually the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. So some of those folks also came over, which again were also in a lot of ways lackluster. The folks that came from there, because if you think about it, they also were very close to getting 15% and failed to get on the debate stage. And again, my question would be, why would you want to have somebody who couldn't get you to that small threshold before to just get onto the debate stage? Why would you bring some of those people with you? But again, I guess it's who you trust. And again, I'm not at the top. So again, that is what it is. So that being said, we had some unqualified folks. And so a lot of time in the early, parts of the summer, middle summer, not were wasted, but when you only have a limited amount of time, every second matters. And so you really need to capitalize on every opportunity. And I guess the best way to say it, opportunities were missed that could have really put us in a better position later on, which really made me frustrated in a lot of ways, because I'm very much type A, and I had a lot of experience doing this type of work, even though I had just, graduated, from college a few months prior. And so, you really needed somebody who had had the ability to run a specialized campaign, kind of how, in 2016, how Bernie had run a very successful grassroots campaign against Hillary Clinton and the, Democratic Party establishment. That's really kind of if you want to kind of say that's the only kind of real close similarity you can draw for what we were doing. We were trying to create attention to the fact that, again, we feel the current holder of the executive office is falling short on a lot of things based on the Constitution and our founding documents and the things that our founding fathers put in place, as well as many of the amendments that had been passed ensuring freedoms for people, and also just the blatant use of, bankrupt morality, racism, anti-Semitism, and, also the, just the complete disregard of fiscal conservancy, the spending, and the lack of concern for the future, and really this all the selfishness that was really coming out of a lot of the legislation in Washington, not doing things again for the majority. When you're an elected official, you're not just there to represent the Republicans. If you're a Republican, you're there to represent everybody, regardless if they voted for you or not. And again, that's what we were trying to bring back. Just bring back decency to the Republican Party. Bring back, like the founding principles that, like moderate, yeah, not moderate, but that people actually cared about when, they joined the party in the first place, and like things that were in kind of like used to be part of the platform that really mattered before they swapped over to being, a populist party. And that, so, these missed opportunities kind of set us back. And, one state director lasted a few months and was asked to, step down. And then another was brought on and again, really had no ideas on planning events and doing all the things you need to do to run. Because when you're running a campaign, it's not just, knocking on doors and passing out literature and holding signs. It's planning meet and greets with the candidate. It's planning house parties. It's checking the scene of events, before you go to the events, to make sure you know where you're going, to make sure you know where the candidate's going to park. You really need to do like all the pre-work and the pre-scouting and all that type of stuff, and you really have to do walkthroughs to make sure things go well. And it's the same thing in the trades where I'm working now, and it's the same thing in a lot of industries. If you don't do the pre-research, you're going to end up missing out on something. And on the time that events were not pre-researched, there were hiccups in the general flow of events, which threw the schedule off, which made the candidate angry. And so, you tried to avoid that. And so that's something that I noticed was happening. And so we didn't, either have enough information from the Boston staff or whatever it might be. And so you really had to go above and beyond to make sure you had everything in an organized fashion. And really, if you're disorganized, at the end of the day, you should not be in campaigning, because you need to be highly motivated and highly organized. So that being said, we're at about, call this summer was over. We did a lot of like old home day events, like where you're celebrating your town and Governor Weld would go, people would be able to meet the candidate. Everybody that, I will say to preface this, everybody that we got the governor in front of was a very positive reception for the most part. Like people, when they heard what he had to say, it was very much targeted towards the common man and, the average American, the middle class American, trying to help them alleviate, the shouldering of all, the tax burden and, implementing, a flat tax and getting away from, keeping the fat cats fat, like, again, there's still going to be enough for everybody to eat, but, those don't need to, gouge the small earnings of the little guy to, be able to afford that fifth house. It's like, it almost created the question of when enough is enough. And, not saying that capitalism is getting out of hand, but yeah, and not sounding too communist or anything like that. But, again, just being a capitalist country that cares. And that's really what, what Governor Weld was getting at. Kind of, it's almost taking a very like grandfatherly statesman approach to, instead of a more like, hardline approach to, to things. But again, you were also given the opportunity to succeed or fail on your own, not just giving everything to everybody for free. It requires a certain element of, personal ambition, I guess, or personal, you have to step up and meet the occasion, but at the same time, you've been given the opportunities to be able to do that. You're not, at a disadvantage of somebody else because, you can't afford to go on the field trip. No, your tax burden has been alleviated because of policy XYZ, or because they zeroed out the budget and, cut out this old dead program by a long dead senator that, was just money was being wasted, or, cut these certain government jobs that were really useless, or, cut back on, or added a working requirement to welfare to cut back on welfare fraud and waste. Again, but also making sure that people that really needed welfare still got it. It's, again, just making common sense fixes to helping people, making sure that, people had access to abortion, but that the use of abortion was safe and rare, at the same time. but making sure that, people that needed it had access to it, or, women that had it had access to it, especially in the cases of, rape and incest, which are, again, I can't even understand how people would not even be able to make exceptions for that. But again, not to get too preachy here, by October 2019, we had also a new set of campaign managers take over at the national level. And so that being said, they were a husband and wife team. You had Martin Skold and Christina Goodlander, who were fantastic people and still friends of mine to this day. Can't speak highly enough about those two folks. They were really, mentored me a lot, which you'll come to see in a minute why all that makes sense. Basically, they are the two that gave me the opportunity to become state director and convince Governor Weld to give me the job. Basically, at the end of the day, I had done some things that had also allowed myself to be, had allowed myself to prove myself to make them realize, and also by, interviewing with them and talking with them a little bit more. And, after airing my frustrations about how things had been run for the last few months, because things were really starting to dip and folks were getting frustrated. And, I really had to make some changes to improve morale, really, at the end of the day, to make sure that we would get to the finish line. And then this is all my opinion, but again, to make sure that we'd get to the finish line and get to the February primary day, to make sure that, as many people as possible knew about Governor Weld's message and that our campaign existed, and that Donald Trump was not the only option running for Republican for president that year. And again, if you had a conscience and some morality behind you, you had another choice. And so at the end of the day, I sat down with them, and right before Thanksgiving, I was promoted to state director. This is November 2019 at this point. I had also planned a very successful town hall at Heronfield Academy on the seacoast in New Hampshire, which was very well attended, and had also planned an event at the Portsmouth Gaslight, which is like a club, restaurant, pizza joint type thing. And we had over 300 folks in attendance from all over New England, especially folks from New Hampshire, though, in support of the campaign. Just to meet Governor Weld, hear him speak. And as I said, it was a very successful event. I even had, some of my friends who were around from college come. And like I said, it was not to toot my own horn, but it was a very impressive event. And it went very well. And again, those weren't the only two things that I did, but those two things happened around that time too, which really proved to them that, I think we got something here. And that's what really propelled me to be able to become the state director. And so at this point, I was now able to enact my plan. And again, not to sound, like, oh, my plan is the only plan that worked, but we were at a point where we really had to, think outside the box and put everything together in a way so that, again, we could get to the finish line and again, try to attract as many people as possible. Because as I said, previously in the episode, a lot of opportunities to really get our name out there had been fumbled. For the example, for one quick example of that, there had been things in the work to really try to get Governor Weld on the Joe Rogan podcast, which would have done very well for us considering Joe Rogan grew up in Massachusetts and I actually even think lived in Massachusetts while Governor Weld was governor, or at least involved in the political system in Massachusetts in some capacity. So, it's kind of unique there in a lot of ways too. And again, I think the episode would have done very well because when you're able to sit down and have a conversation with Governor Weld, he's very personable, he's very funny, and he's incredibly intelligent. He is probably one of the most intelligent politicians I have ever worked for, if not one of the most intelligent politicians I have ever worked for. The man has been involved in a lot of unique moments in our country's history, whether that be taking down organized crime when he was a DA or an assistant DA, in working, against the Italian mob in the North End of Boston, or when it was, told me a quick story when when I first met him. He was like, "Oh, how much do you know about Panama?" And I was like, "Well, I know about the canal and blah blah blah." And I started talking about Manuel Noriega and his role with the Narcos and his involvement being a friend of Pablo Escobar and blah blah blah. And he goes, "Well, when I was in part of the team that indicted him when they dragged him out of when the army went down and dragged him out of Panama." I'm like, "No way!" And they showed me the picture and everything. It was incredible. He was the guy that indicted Manuel Noriega. It's just, like I said, if you're a political person or a history person, you're like, wow, that's That's quite interesting, in my opinion. But this also, before getting into, like the tail end of the campaign, I wanted to get into kind of a lighter, less preachy kind of sidebar, which also kind of opens up a lot of the other stuff that happens along with the podcast, and you'll kind of allow you guys to kind of connect the dots on something, I guess. And so this is kind of the sidebar for the episode, Weld 2020 and the Grateful Dead. And you're gonna say, how the hell are you connecting one of your favorite bands to what you used to do for work? And well, uniquely, Governor Weld was a Deadhead. He was a fan of the Grateful Dead. And actually, one of my good buddies and campaign staffers that worked with me was also part of a Deadhead family that had been at many a show and been on many never missed a Sunday show and everything like that. The whole works. And so we'd be driving through these, in the fall, we'd be driving through beautiful back roads of New Hampshire with the foliage, going to events or going to door knock or going to a town or going to meet with somebody or whatever instance of travel here, and be listening to this incredible music that some of it I had never even heard before. Not to say that I was unfamiliar with the Grateful Dead, but this is really one that really got its hooks into me, to be completely honest with you. So, it hasn't been a huge run on that, but it's the reality of the situation, and it's the true part of the story, I guess, really, at the end of the day. And so, we would listen to a lot of that music, and so you had a large, I guess, jam band presence on the campaign in a lot of ways. And so, that's kind of like a unique thing there. And so that was I really guess really kind of fully indoctrinated me into that world in a lot of ways, oddly enough. By working for the presidential campaign, I also really fully became a Deadhead at that point too myself, which is really kind of unique and ironic. But in the next part here, we're going to get into the tail end of the campaign, really, after I take over as state director in the last few months of 2019, and really how I tried to hobble the horse together to really create a really diverse strategy to make as big an impact as possible in a really short period of time. Because, to be honest with you, when we went into the end of 2019, what few polls had been done on the Republican primary showed us at like 1%, 3%. It was not good. It was not good at all, and the outcome did not look very good. And so there was a lot of work that had to be done like I said, in a very short period of time. And again, I wish, and one of my biggest regrets, and this is, I guess, one of the reasons I want to kind of put this to bed, and this, you'll see this in the latter half, is that I wish there were things I could have done back then, or I could have been involved earlier on to really kind of springboard the thing sooner. Because again, at the time Trump was getting impeached, there was a lot of things that could have gone right for us and we could have capitalized on if not opportunities had been missed. But again, hindsight's 2020. You can't regret a lot of things, and again, that's kind of one of the reasons for this episode. And so after a quick drink break, I'll get into the last half of the campaign and really kind of where we are today. So by the last half of 2019, I had become state director after a meeting with the campaign managers. Had proven to them that at the end of the day, I was the most capable person of steering the ship in the best direction, making the biggest impact in the least amount of time. Because as I said, things were missed, opportunities were really missed. But like I said, though, earlier on in the episode, every person that we got the governor in front of really agreed with what he had to say, and really, again, really was able to process it and really had respect for what he was doing. It's very rare that you're working in politics and you have people come up and thank you for what you're doing. Whether they be a Democrat, Republican, we had a whole mix of people. And that was the unique thing about our campaign, is that we were truly a rainbow coalition. We had, if you looked at our campaign, we had everybody. We had folks of color. We had folks in the transgender folks. We had everybody. We really had everybody. The white kid from Maine. We had the New England waspy type from Long Island. We had everybody. We had literally we even had a Rockefeller that was an old friend of Bill's that came in. He and you're saying, oh, he's a Rockefeller. What'd he do? Write a check? No, the guy came up and door knocked. The guy lived I'm pretty sure in New York, and he came up to and stayed with one of his friends in northern New Hampshire, up in the Lebanon, Hanover area, up where Dartmouth is, and up in that area. And he helped out. He pounded the pavement. He knocked doors, and that's what was really cool. And I got to meet this guy. I had emailed with him, and again at the end of the campaign, really, when we had like our last few events together, I was able to meet a lot of these people who had only been emailing with, and a lot of the times that, and part of my plan, and this is I guess kind of a good way to segue into kind of telling a little bit about my plan without giving away all my secrets, because I still have political aspirations in some capacity, can't give away all my secrets and tricks. But that being said, one of my, I had in people independently working on their own, kind of, not again buddy system, all that we used, but we had, people kind of like independent cells working along because we had limited staff and limited money, and we couldn't be everywhere at once, even if we wanted to, even if we should have been. We had a staff of 3, and we should have had a staff of probably 10 or 12. But again, you do what you do with what you have, and it was what it was. It just meant I had to do the work of 3 people, and that's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but that's okay. That's what it was at the time. And again, I also at the same time was not cool with doing it, but was cool with doing it, if you know what I mean, without really going into detail on that. But again, it was there was more on the line. It was bigger than me. It was, again, it's like I sound dramatic saying this, but it was saving democracy. But it really was saving democracy, as the events as the events of the 2020 election would prove, to the logical few, uh to people. It's crazy. But again, another parts of my plan that I enacted, we had a limited ground game. I spun up very quickly. We started doing door knocking on the weekends, all that type of stuff. Literature drops, a bunch of other interesting things. And again, along with my little independent cells, working across the state in different areas where we would have, sympathetic ears. We also, again, just kind of really tried to focus on the areas where we could do well. And again, I'm not going to go into detail and give away where those are, again, because again, at this the part another reason, kind of sort of why I'm making this episode, because we are at the time where people are going to start announcing that they're going to be running for president, or they're going to be going to New Hampshire and visiting. Watch the news, folks. Watch the news over the next couple weeks, and you're going to see, this spring, this summer, and then this, fall, people are going to be announcing that they're running for president of the United States as Democrats and Republicans. It'll be interesting to see, especially who comes out of the Republican Party. But mark my words, people are going to start announcing, and this is when people start to hire staffs. People are going to start reaching out, and so if any of you college students listening, political science guys, start reaching out to, if you there's a candidate you like, reach out to them, because there's a good chance you might get a job. That's what I did. I mean, directly or indirectly, that's kind of how it worked for me. Again, I got hired in the spring of the year prior to the election. So this, like I said, if you want to work in, presidential campaigns, now's the time, because this is when they're hiring people. That's another good little marking point, I guess, for me. But that being said, I got the governor to speak at St. Anselm College to a few classes, and was received very well. But you could tell, and it was interesting, and this is kind of an interesting segue too, I guess, that you always had kind of one dissenter, and that was the one Trump Republican that always had to make their point made, and always had to say, well, President Trump, or had to do something to be obnoxious or annoying. To be, for example, there was a student at St. Anselm College. And again, you're welcome to do whatever you want, freedom of speech, but you also have the freedom to look like a moron, and to just be, I guess, kind of disrespectful. Sits right in the front row with his Trump shirt on. That's fine. You can do what you want, but you also can look like a fool, and that's okay too. And so, that it was interesting, because I knew the student too, and they at least were friendly with me, and it was very disrespectful, at least, in that aspect, in my opinion, to me. But, so be it. I could tell we were getting under their skin. And so I walked out of there smiling, knowing at the end of the day that I had accomplished what I wanted to do. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be petty about it. It's just funny how those things kind of worked out. And so We were able to make some very good headway, however, in a short period of time. And so before we knew it, January had flown by. We were trudging through the snows and cold of New Hampshire, even getting signs in the ground in January when the ground had frozen. I'm not going to give away the secret on how to do that. That's an old secret that you have to learn. You have to go through the trenches like I did, all right? But that being said, under the direction of our steering committee and with my guidance and plan that I had been working on since the early part of the campaign as a plan B just in case. That's the type of guy I am. You always got to have a plan. That's be prepared is something they taught us when we were in Boy Scouts. So, we're fast forward and we're in February and the primary is a few days away. To give some credit to our campaign managers, they were quickly able to spin up some type of game in Iowa, so we didn't make no showing at all. Governor Weld went out there, and again, every polling place he went to talk to people, or every caucus location he went to talk to voters, they voted more favorably, and you could see the numbers at the towns where he was actually able to go and talk to. But unfortunately, Iowa is kind of a little big state because you have a lot. It's flat, and you got to drive. You just got to drive it. And things are kind of spread out. So that being said, I picked up Governor Weld from the airport at Logan Airport, and we drove back up to New Hampshire to get ready for the last few days before the primary. We had a good string of events, including some town halls that were very well attended, having close to hundreds of one had a few hundred people, having close to 100 people at your town halls, 2-3 days before the actual primary when people are going to vote is a very good sign. Uh, Considering we did a town hall back when we had other guidance and the campaign and 3 people showed up, and again, you have those do happen. You have to admit that those are going to happen on the campaign, especially if you're doing a grassroots rebellion, renegade type of campaign. You're going to have those events where only 3 diehard people are going to come out. It unfortunately happens, especially if you again miss opportunities or host events in towns where you just don't really have support for your type of candidate. And so you really had to look at the areas across the state and really kind of say, is this, area match my candidate's mold? And if it does, you go there. And if it doesn't, you kind of stayed away in certain situations. You obviously made exceptions to the rule, but this kind of creates another segue. When I picked up Governor Weld, this is a funny story. He gets a phone call, and he's like, he's talking with this guy named Ralph, and I was just like, oh, how'd your phone call go? He goes, oh, I was talking, after he was done the phone call. I wasn't trying to be nosy, but he's in the car. We were listening to some music. I turned the music off and let him have his phone call, and then I just asked, oh, how'd the phone call go? He goes, oh, good. It was just Ralph Nader checking in to see how I did in the Iowa caucus, and I go, you're friends with Ralph Nader? This is the guy who, instituted seatbelts in cars and, really created a lot of safety in the automotive industry for a lot of people and has done a lot in, the American political scape and is just if you study politics or know anything about American politics, is, a well-known figure. He's in every textbook, when you get to the middle part of the 20th century. He played a large role in like I said, the American political scape. But that being said, that was just a fun little story. But that being said, primary day comes to town, and we had the plan to visit polling locations and how our supporters meet us there and have good showing for the media and for poll goers. Reminding them at the last minute, hey, you can still vote for Governor Weld. There is a respectable option. A respectable Republican to vote for. And so that's really, was our type of thing. Really trying to bring a moral and good approach that was also forward thinking and financially responsible, which was really, again, everything that the Trump administration was not. And you can try to go nitpick with me, and I can go point for point on legislation again. And again, that's what we were arguing, and our whole point with our campaign is that if you are the executive of this country, you're not supposed to act like a child. You shouldn't call world leaders names. Yeah, oh, he looks like a badass. It's like, Well, the world leaders are not supposed to be badasses. That's what we have, soldiers for and special ops guys and spies and all these other things. Those are the badasses, with all due respect. Like, having I'd much rather have a leader who's moral, capable, and intelligent over a badass, quote unquote. I don't know really what skills translate to being a badass. Look at Vladimir Putin. A lot of people think he's a badass, and he's a inhumane monster. So, I mean, if you want a badass to lead the country, by all means, have a badass. I'm good on that one though. But that said, we took off on primary day, and it was very unique. We had the Weld wagon, which was an RV owned by the brother of and supporter / steering committee member, a brother of Betty Tamposi, Nick Tamposi. Shout out to Nick, and thank you, Nick, for really kind of decking out your RV with full Weld 2020 banners, lights, the whole works. It was really like the command post for the primary day. I rode in the as I dubbed it, the Weld wagon, and we went from polling location to polling location with the candidate, and really made a big showing whenever we showed up anywhere. It was really awesome, really tremendous. And like I said, it was really unique in a lot of ways. I was going outside of the box and doing unique and different things that the average presidential campaign might not do. But you couldn't be the average presidential campaign because you didn't have the same budget as a regular presidential campaign. You didn't have the same staff. And so, with all the limitations that I had between advertising and everything else that I couldn't do that I wanted to do, you just had to really get creative. And so that's what I did. And I used really used all the resources that were available to me. But we made a nice loop around New Hampshire, starting in Manchester. And again, thank you if anybody's listening to this that was a poll worker that day who froze their hands off. It was cold that day. It was sleeting and freezing rain. Anybody who stood at a poll location, special thank you. And I owe a special thank you also again to Rich Slingsby, who stood outside Manchester Ward 1 for an outrageous amount of time. But he did it for a good cause, and like I said, Rich, thank you so much. I owe you so much, and like I said, next time we're together, I owe you a beer or a cigar, whichever of you're choosing. You let me know, or a scotch, also a scotch. I know. So that being said, I owe so many people who volunteered so much, because the folks who came out they gave more than any volunteer I've ever seen on any campaign, and I've worked on a lot of different campaigns, and as I've said before, finding volunteers are very hard, but the ones we had and that stuck around were very, very good, and they were very clutch. And so that being said, we really did a good job at the end of the day. We ended primary night after the polls closed with 9%. And you might say, well, 9% out of 100 really isn't that much. And you're right, it isn't that much. But again, for a campaign that was run by effectively a college, a college graduate, and had a limited shoestring budget and had a limited staff and had limitations every time we turned a corner, we did a lot. And we really made a good showing. We were just a percentage short of being able to send delegates to the convention, which was unfortunate because we really could have created some interesting situations if we were able to do that. But that being said, we finished strong, and we finished with our heads held high. We didn't cheat. We overcame a lot of adversity, and one of the things that, and to really kind of, I unfortunately dish on the Republican Party for a minute. And again, I understand why they do it, but I wish they didn't do it, because again, it does not promote good democracy. So there's a quick sidebar. There's this thing called ballot access, and to get on the ballots, it is what it sounds like. To get on the ballots in the state, you either have to get enough signatures or blah 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 blah. There's a certain hoops you have to jump through, or send a check, $1,000 made out to the political party, or blah blah blah. So, knowing that we had a limited budget, the state parties in a lot of these states started raising their rates for ballot access, knowing that the Trump campaign had a lot of money and knowing that we didn't have a lot of money, because you have to report this stuff to the Federal Elections Commission, the FEC. And so we knew they had millions and billions of dollars, and we had, thousands of dollars. And so they just basically priced us out of, a lot of states, which was very unfortunate because towards the end of, my tenure as state director in New Hampshire in, January and those months right before the primary, we started missing ballot access deadlines. We weren't on the ballot in insert state here, and we weren't on the ballot at insert state here. And so between that and the lack of money, and again some of the shady, and I'm calling them shady. It's not really, again, it's not fair. It's not equal. It really, again, yeah, okay, yeah, you're the ones who make the rules, but you're also going to bend the rules to make it convenient to your situation, to make people not be able to take notice of us and not let our name get out and blah, blah, blah. But the other thing that really limited us, and again, I'm not going to name any individuals, out of respect for them, and also out of, kind of, I guess, respect for myself, because I'm not a basher, but there were some folks in the upper epsilons of the campaign, or the upper parts of the campaign. I probably just misused that, but regardless, the upper parts of the campaign that were not on the same page as those folks who were working very hard on the ground to get things done. Some of the folks on the campaign were just doing this as a protest, in the sense that, well, us being a candidate is basically enough, and whatever we do is just showing that we stood up, and we're going to not be the nail in the coffin, but we'll be the pebble that gets in your shoe. And that's not really the role I was looking to be. I was looking to be the nail in the coffin, the thing that really proved to people that Donald Trump is not going to win this election, or, do enough damage to him to, trigger some interesting things at the convention, which I won't get into because that gets into a whole different side of, Republican convention law and everything like that. So, but regardless of that fact, in between, Trump getting, impeached, we thought, because, at the same time, this is a unique thing. Mike Pence was not technically on the ballot. He was on the ballot as the vice president. The vice president does not just automatically become the presidential candidate. When you sign the paperwork, Trump has to be the person actually running. So Pence would have to be if he wanted to run and Trump died or something like that, or got impeached or whatever happened. I'm not died, but if Trump got impeached, or if he died, whatever, he would have to. Pence just doesn't become. It's not like, like when the president gets assassinated or something, the vice president steps in. That's not how it works in the campaign. You actually have to be the person who's on the documents. If you understand what I'm saying there. If not, message me and I can explain it to people individually. But that being said, we were, again, put in a really unique situation a lot of different times. But again, these options and things were just missed, and so we ended with 9%, but that 9%, almost 10%, did prove that, there's enough people in the state of New Hampshire that are not cool with this, and not cool with Trump, and so that means he does not have the whole party united around him, which at the end of the day is really going to cause problems in the general election, and that's what really started to show the cracks, there, but also, again, it was, getting back to it, frustrating that not everybody was on board to really, run a full guns blazing, renegade grassroots campaign against the Trump organization and the populism and the fascist part of the Trump party that, is now the Republican Party. You have folks like Liz Cheney who stood up, and, other folks there, but really it's a really sad state of affairs at the end of the day here, and it's showing really now if you turn the news on, between all the legal battles that Trump's going through and everything like that. But again, we exited the stage gracefully. The campaign did continue, but after the primary, basically my tenure with the campaign was effectively over, and I was I was unemployed. But the night after the primary in the party, I slept well for probably the first time in almost, however many, 10 months, however long it was, almost a year, 8-9 months, however long it was, doing that, because of just, I was burnt out, and it really took a major toll on me. And it really, this was a unique event in a lot of ways, because it opened my eyes to a lot of different things, and I really, was racking my brain, for what did this teach me? It taught me a lot about, how to run a campaign and all these other things, but it also, this experience opened my eyes to a lot of, issues the country is facing, including my own experiences with being overworked, dealing with difficult circumstances due to campaign personnel, as I mentioned earlier, and also adjusting to adult life after college. And so, having a lot in flux and having a lot go on while also trying to take on a very stressful job was, it burnt me out. I was fried. And not in any type of good sense, okay? I was effectively useless mentally, and so I came home, and when I mean home, I don't mean back to my apartment in Newmarket, New Hampshire. I packed a bag, told Jim I'd be back the next week or in the next couple weeks, because he had traveled for work and done other things like that. Told him I'd be back soon. I was still obviously going to pay rent because our rent was still good, or our lease was, or whatever, was still good until June, and said I'd be back, sporadically, or, maybe I'd try to look for a job, but I just had to go home. And also, my buddies were going up to camp, for the boys trip, at our friends the Antwerp camp on Sebec, which I've talked about many a time on the podcast before. But that said, little did I know the world was going to shut down after that, and so, you know, it's hard to campaign and join another campaign when you can't get close to people. And so that really kind of set me on the path that I am on now. And again, really kind of, led to the teaching and then, the electrical stuff. And again, not out of politics by any means completely. I still, really do keep tabs on what's going on, and really just kind of frustrated with everything between January 6th and the disgusting events that took place on that day, and just everything that's gone on. It's just really is too bad that we've just let things go so far, and this is on both sides. It's just, I think we need to really get back to what matters, just be a little bit kinder to people, balance the budget, get the money's balanced, and not, spend more than we have, and, respect nature, and also, just give the time of day to the folks that are telling us, maybe we need to make a few changes to the environment, or how we treat the environment, whether that be putting carbon catchers, not making, as Governor Weld liked to say, not making drastic changes like, not eating meat anymore or doing anything like that, but moving towards, more renewable sources of energy, not just fully going full blown into EV and stuff like that, but using it where it is using different types of renewables where it's practical. If you still have to use gasoline in cold areas because, EVs lose half their range in the wintertime, then yeah, you still have to use gasoline. But if you cut out, and again, you could say, oh, we have to get the lithium and blah, 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 blah. But regardless, you have something, what we were saying is, and we had plans, we had many different scenarios. Something has to be done to address what is coming. And that was the cool thing about working for Governor Weld. At the end of the day, he cared about the American people, and he had a plan for the things that were to come. They weren't flying by the seat of their pants like the Trump presidency did. They were ready to adjust things to help the common people, to help everybody. And again, not giving things away for free. It was not a freebie. It was giving everybody the same opportunities. And that's what I think we need to get back to in this country, and what we really need to strive to. Because at the end of the day, if everybody has the same opportunities, you can only blame yourself if you don't make it somewhere. And again, yeah, you make it sound so simple. And I know, like I said, it's very idealistic. I understand that. And again, it wouldn't always, not everything goes smoothly 100%. But again, things would be a lot better. And so that's where I'll leave that on that issue. But that being said, it really was a unique job. And again, I never really thought I'd have, quote unquote, I guess you could say in a lot of ways, my dream job so early. I got to work, I really always wanted to work on a presidential campaign. Again, I graduated from St. Anselm College in 2019 with a political science degree, and, politics had been a long time passion. And so, again, if you'd listened to the podcast, you've known that. If you haven't, I guess I probably should have explained that earlier. Oh, well, so be it. You must have gotten that from knowing that, again, I was putting in for, political thing. And anyway, but that being said, really just trying to wrap this up. And again, kind of not put it to bed in a negative way, but just trying to, really kind of completely hole out this issue and really just kind of fully address it and, tell the whole story at once, for the most part. Again, I've had to leave some things out, obviously for, privacy and other, reasons like that. And, I don't want to just have it be a tell-all and be like a nasty, gossip magazine, but just tell the story that there were these people that stood up and proved that Donald Trump would not be president of the United States, and we were right. We called it. And I had said that from the beginning. I said, if we get anywhere near 10%, it proves that, there's at least a good majority of the Republican Party. There's at least 10%, 15% of the Republican Party that is not going to vote for Trump, and it's going to be the nail in the coffin. And again, I wanted to go after a bigger portion of that, but that's okay. That didn't happen. That is what it was. But again, my work is not done. There are still things I want to do to help people. And again, what I'm doing right now to help people, I'm giving people safe wiring, safe peace of mind. Because again, the work I do, I'm not a hack, and there are a lot of hacks out there in the trades. You don't have to look very far to find your local, Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace electrician, plumber, or whatever. It's hard finding good tradesmen out there too, folks. And that's one thing that I feel like has overlapped into the. I will say one thing, kind of to reflect, has overlapped into the trades that I see, and that one thing that makes me very angry. And if I ever end up in any political setting, you really a long look needs to be looked at the trades too, and to see people that really cut corners. And it's not okay, because again, as I said earlier on, and as Governor Weld said, if people don't have safe, comfortable homes, they're worried about their their plumbing exploding, or they're worried about their floors falling through, or their roof crashing down on them. How can they go on to work and take comfort in the fact that their kids can sleep in that house at night, or knowing that they're not using toxic materials, or doing the right things, or doing right by their employees, or whatever it is. There's a lot of things that we need to look at here, and just kind of assess and go, And that's what the cool thing was about working on the Weld 2020 campaign. We thought about things. And again, it wasn't just having one plan, it was having a many-pronged approach to really kind of change things for everybody. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it, guys. Again, I had the unique opportunity, and I will share the video on the DuView podcast social media pages. I had the opportunity of speaking at our end of the campaign party, the primary night, quote unquote, victory party. And I'll share that with you guys too, just to kind of share my thoughts on things, to kind of really kind of set the mood and the theme for you guys with this episode. It's a real good part of that. So, like I said, check us out on social media, and thank you guys for listening. This has been a real good episode for me to kind of round this thing out. And again, we're going to move on to some new things, move on to more main focus political stuff when we do talk about politics on here. But, that being said, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll be back here. New guests are coming. Thank you again to Jake for coming on a couple weeks ago, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks here. DuView 207 on Instagram, and the DuView podcast everywhere else. Video will be coming soon too, guys. I do promise that. I know I've said that, but again, that is one other thing I did have to mention. Video is coming soon. That will be here soon. I promise. The final stages, the final, few things have, been set so that can be a thing. So that being said, guys, everybody have a great week or great few weeks here, and we'll see you guys here again pretty soon.